There are 8 main reasons why the leaves on your houseplants turn yellow, and I'm going to cover them all while troubleshooting this peace lily here that is starting to turn yellow. If you have a yellowing plant like this one here, then follow these troubleshooting steps to identify and correct the problem. Let's begin. One of the most common reasons why your houseplants may be turning yellow is overwatering. Overwatering your plant means that the soil of your plant is constantly wet. You may be watering your houseplants every 2 or 3 days thinking this is what houseplants need, but houseplants generally don't like to be sitting in too much water. If you are overwatering your houseplants, then your plant will usually respond by developing yellow mushy leaves that are also limp. When this happens to a houseplant, people tend to assume that it's a problem with a lack of water, and they end up giving the plant more water, thereby making the problem worse. The best thing to do is to stick your finger deep into the soil and feel whether the soil is dry at the top 2 or 3 inches. If it feels moist, then I'd leave it for a few days before checking again. An alternative option is to invest in a moisture meter such as this one here. This tells you exactly how moist the soil is. I've got a link to this in the description if you wanted to buy it. So with my peace lily here, I don't think that overwatering is the problem because I'm very careful about watering my plants, but I am just gonna double check with my moisture meter and just check the soil of the plant. So I'm gonna stick it in, and the plant is reading 2 on the moisture meter, so it's on the drier side, so overwatering this plant doesn't appear to be the problem. Another common reason why your plant may have yellowing leaves is a consistent lack of water. If you repeatedly put your plant through a period of drought by not watering for weeks at a time, then this is going to stress the plant out and the leaves will start to turn yellow. My general advice for most houseplants is to let the soil dry out in between waterings, but you don't want to go too far. There should still be some level of moisture in the soil. So I generally water my houseplants once a week during the spring and summer while the plant is actively growing, and I reduce that down to probably once every 2 or 3 weeks during the winter, and this seems to be the sweet spot for my plants. I know that I regularly monitor the moisture level in my plants by using my moisture meter, and I did just check this plant here, so I do know that this is not suffering from a consistent lack of water. There was a little bit of moisture in here because that moisture meter did read 2. So it is dry, but there is still some moisture in there. So I am fairly confident that underwatering this plant is not the issue. If your houseplant is severely root bound, then the leaves will start to turn yellow. This is because there are too many roots in the pots, and therefore there's a lack of nutrients and water in the soil for the plant to push out new growth, and older leaves will start to wilt and die. I check the roots of my plants every spring to check whether they're root bound and need potting up into a bigger pot. I do have a couple of videos on repotting some plants. I've repotted my Philodendron Birkin, my Syngonium and my Califea, so I'll leave those in the description, so do check them out. If your plant is root bound, then you obviously want to put your plant into a bigger pot with some nice fresh potting soil. So I am going to check the roots of this plant just to check whether it is root bound or not. It is possible. I've not repotted it for a while, for probably at least a year. So I've just got my tray here just to catch any dirt. So I'm just going to carefully take the plant out of its pot, and that is root bound. So as you can see, lots of roots in this plant. It's not majorly root bound, I don't think. There is still soil in there, but there is a lot of roots in the bottom, so it may be struggling for nutrients and water. So I will up pot this one, give it a fresh boost with some nice fresh potting soil, and it should respond. So that is one of the main reasons why this plant is yellowing. So it's a good job I took it out of its pots. It's nice to see on this plant, you'll notice that the roots are going down to the bottom of the pots. And the reason for that is because I bottom water my houseplants, so all the roots are searching for the water at the bottom, and that's healthy for your plant. So the plant isn't circling around the pot at the top, and there's a potential there for it to strangle the crown of the plant. So I'm happy with that. Too much direct sunlight is probably one of the most common reasons for yellowing plants, and I do suspect that this is one of the main problems with this plant. Houseplants generally like indirect sunlight and will not tolerate long exposure to the direct sun. So I keep this plant on my west-facing windowsill of my bathroom, so it does get a few hours of intense afternoon sun every day. The greens aren't popping as much as they should be, which suggests it's a little bit sun stressed. So I'm therefore going to move this plant away from my bathroom windowsill out of direct sun. So this is a relatively risk-free approach to take, and I would always recommend doing this as a kind of first port of call to see how the plant responds. A lack of sunlight can also be an issue for your plant. If your plant is in a dark corner in your room and the leaves are turning yellow, then it may be a problem where it's not getting enough indirect sunlight. Plants, of course, need light to photosynthesize and store energy. If it's not getting enough light, then the plant cannot make enough energy to push out new growth and the leaves will start to turn yellow. You probably also noticed that the leaves on your plant are looking a little bit faded and a little bit limp as well. If this is the case, then it's obviously an easy fix. I'll just move your plant to a place closer to your window in your house, but I'll keep it out of direct sun and it should respond fairly well. Yellowing leaves can indicate a pest or disease problem on your house plant. This would usually be accompanied by deformed leaves and stems. So a pest that's on your plant would normally be sucking the sap from the leaves of the plant, so you should see some blotching on the leaves. This would be really small, so just carefully examine the leaves very closely, the underside and on the top of the leaves. You may also spot some black spots on the leaves. This would indicate pest excrement that has been left on the plant's leaves. If you do notice something a little bit odd, then you can always do a search on Google for pest damage on houseplants and check the images to see if you can see a match with what you're seeing on your house plant. And then you want to follow the advice for that pest problem. You want to be looking for pest damage from things like spider mites, thrips, mealybugs in particular. The good news here is that pest problems can be brought under control as long as it's spotted early enough. Houseplant disease can be a houseplant killer, and you would see blotchy, deformed leaves and stems. There are many diseases out there such as leaf spot, mold, powdery mildew and blight. So if you suspect your plant may be infected with something, then I would compare to images online to see if you can identify the problem and then go from there. I've had a good look over this plant here and I'm not noticing any pest issues or any disease issues. There's not really any blotching on the leaves in particular. There's no black spots. So I've gone through and just looked on the underside, see if there's any signs of webbing or things like that. And I've had a good look and there's nothing there. There's no indication that any insects are kind of sapping away at the leaves. So I don't think that pest is an issue, and I don't think disease is an issue either. There's no indication on here, there's no deformed leaves or stems, so I'm fairly confident that this plant is not suffering from pest or disease damage. The leaves on our house plants sometimes turn yellow just simply due to the natural aging of the plant. As a plant gets older and bigger, it will naturally shed some of its older leaves as it puts its energy into pushing out new growth. I would expect this to only affect a few leaves at a time, so if your whole plant is looking a bit yellow, then it probably indicates that you have another problem. There's nothing to do here except just cut the leaves out from the plant so that the plant can stop putting its energy in towards those spent leaves and focus its energy on pushing out new growth. So you just want to go through. So just go as far to the base as possible and then just cut it out. Just cut out all the yellowing leaves. That'll improve the appearance of the plants and it will improve the health of the plant as well. Fertilizing problems are another common reason why your plant's leaves are turning yellow, but this can be a bit trickier to identify. We need to be careful before making decisions about over or under fertilizing our plants, otherwise we risk doing damage to our plants. I would therefore leave this to a last possible reason and discount all other reasons that I've mentioned in this video before landing on this as the cause. So plants need food just like you and me and other organisms to survive. You should periodically be fertilizing your houseplants during the spring and summer using a fertilizer that is suitable for indoor plants. If you've never fertilized your plants, then the chances are that your plants are struggling through a lack of nutrients. In this case, I would give the plant a light fertilize and see how it responds. People often confuse yellowing leaves for a lack of nutrients and fertilize their plants repeatedly to try and solve the problem, when this is actually slowly killing the plant by giving the plant more nutrients than it can handle. The telltale sign here is yellowing leaves. I fertilize my plants once a month during the spring and summer and use a very light dosage following the instructions on the box of the fertilizer. If you are fertilizing more than this and you have yellowing leaves, then I would take the plant out of its pot, discard the soil, I would wash the roots, repot and see how the plant responds. So I fertilized this plant in early spring for the first time since summertime. So I don't think it's obviously not an over-fertilizing problem, but it was about 5 weeks ago. So this plant is probably ready to be fed again. So I'm going to give this plant a feed and see how it responds. The most likely problems that I think are affecting this plant is too much light, too much direct sunlight. It is slightly root bound and there's probably a slight lack of nutrients because it's been a few weeks since I last fertilized. So I'm going to give this plant a prune, I'm going to give it some food. I'm going to repot it and I'm going to see how the plant responds. If you've heard some classic houseplant myths, like you should be misting your houseplants to increase humidity or that plants purify the air, and you're unsure whether these are true, then click on the link over here and let me bust some houseplant myths for you. I'll see you there. Thanks for watching.